Hello, Fieldswell family. For any of our listeners who have ever thought of starting a podcast, I'm sure two of the greatest questions or fears that you have are, how do I get started? And how will I find guests to be on my show? Look no further. Today we are joined by Alex Sanfilippo, the founder of PodMatch.com, a software that automatically matches podcast guests and hosts for interviews. I myself am an avid user of PodMatch and connected with Alex at a podcasting conference in DC. At least that's where we first started messaging. Alex is also the host of the top-rated podcast, Podcasting Made Simple, and a lead educator in the podcasting industry. Alex's sole focus is to serve independent podcast guests and hosts so they can grow their influence and revenue so they can better serve their listeners. Alex, welcome to the show.
Lauren, thank you so much for having me. It's truly an honor to be here with you today.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you here and to dive into the podcasting industry and just to learn a little bit more about you as an entrepreneur. So tell us why you're so passionate about the podcasting industry.
Sure. This is a long story, but I'm going to make it as short as I can here. I got into podcasting years ago when I was actually deciding I wanted to become an entrepreneur. And Lauren, I'll tell you, I was really good as a corporate guy. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, all right, like if I can do all this in corporate, I can be helping run a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded organization. Like I was at the C-suite level. I'm like, I can probably do anything. So I started what's called the side hustle. And then I started another one and another one. And one after another, they kept on failing and weren't working. And then I realized, I was like, wait a minute, maybe this entrepreneurship thing is different. And that's what got me into podcasting. I had this idea where I was like, you know what? There are people who have left a 9-to-5 job to become a full-time entrepreneur. I don't want to pay for coaching from those people, but I'd love to bring them on my podcast if they would talk to me. And I want to figure out what they did to leave that 9-to-5 job. And so I started a podcast to do that. And so I started bringing people on that were very successful entrepreneurs, but at one point, someone who was working corporate. And I have no problem with corporate at all. I loved my experience with it. I just knew that there was something else that I really wanted. And so I decided like, hey, maybe I need this, right? Like I need to learn from other people. So two things happened. One, I fell in love with podcasting, and two, I figured out how to become an entrepreneur. So I kind of blended the two things together.
That's so incredible. Literally starting a podcast and learning from the guests you have in order to do the thing you're looking to do.
Yeah. And I didn't start with that expectation though. Like I really thought like I came from aerospace, and before anyone who's listening thinks I was something interesting or fun, I wasn't an astronaut, skydiver, or fighter pilot. Worked behind a computer. I enjoyed the job, but I assumed I'd do something more in logistics or something like that. Like I really just didn't know where I would go. But the medium, like I fell in love with it. I was terrified to get into it. It was a lot of work at first. But once I got into it, I was like, man, this is the thing. And I really started really devoting my time to it. And again, it kind of became history.
I love it so much. You know, for me, I think it took me like 5 years to get for my life to take me to a place where I felt like I had the confidence and the knowledge and the skill set to actually be able to be a host and to have these conversations. But once you start, I was like, why didn't I start sooner? You know, it's such an amazing platform. You get to really have intimate conversations with people you never would have expected to talk to.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like one of my first guests who came on, same thing. By the way, it took me too long to launch. It took me about 9 months, and really it should have just taken a few weeks. Now I look back, I was so nervous during the first few conversations, but they were people that I, like while recording, I'm like, I would never have access to this individual if it weren't for this medium. Like while I should be thinking about what I'm going to ask them next, I'm like, how am I talking to this person? and I wasn't going to sell myself short. It was just like, there's no way our paths would have ever crossed other than this medium right here. And I think that's the beauty of podcasting and what it provides.
So incredible. So I know you've had numerous podcasts at this point, and a major key to growth is, of course, sticking with it. I was saying earlier, my mentor said, like, it's a 3 to 5 year play, stick with it. So many people give up too soon. And it's just like becoming pro at anything. It takes time and consistency and dedication and perseverance. So talk to us a little bit about like your journey and how you may have persevered or like honed in on your skills internally, the work you've done on yourself to continue on and like trust in the process and stick with it.
Sure. Yeah, Lauren, first off, it's insightful that that your mentor or coach brought this up. It really is the long game. And I'm not going to get too deep in the analytics and stats, but just everyone who's checking this out and you're like, okay, is it really that tough? Just so you know, only 47% of people who start a podcast make it to 8 episodes.
Wow.
If you're doing one a week, that's 2 months. People aren't even making it that far, to give you an idea of how long most people last. And if you're trying to get to 100 episodes, which is where I personally think the meaningful, it really starts taking off. It really starts going. It's less than 10% of people are making it that far.
Wow.
And so, yeah, there's a lot. And for me, I just shared my podcasting story. There was actually one before that where I was just testing it. I recorded it on my phone in the car. And I think I released a handful of episodes, probably about 2 months worth at different times, and just didn't even understand what I was doing. That's ultimately what kind of brought me back to it. That's how I knew what it was. So yeah, like most people, I decided to try it and had like a failed attempt, although I never like publicized it or anything like that. But when I went back into it to speak to these successful entrepreneurs, I went in with a plan. And I knew the data at that point because I had met with mentors and other people in podcasting. And I was like, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to have 13 episodes in the can, ready to go before I even launch. That way I at least have 13 weeks at a weekly cadence of release. And that's what I was doing. And so I just knew from day one that, hey, if I want this to go somewhere and I want to respect these individuals' time that's coming on my podcast, I owe it to them and myself to keep it going.
Yes.
And because I'll be real, like if I go on a podcast, and I've had this happen a handful of times, I go on it, they never actually release the episode because they end up deciding to stop their podcast before the release date. It's like, man, that's like, you got to think of the other person's time as well, right? So,
for sure.
and you actually spoke really well on a solo episode you did. It was on, and I'm encouraging everyone to go check this out. It was on September 11th, 2024. Lauren shared 3 things keeping you stuck in life. And one of those, I won't give all 3 away, but one of them was accountability. For me, my accountability became the person in the guest seat, scheduling in advance, always having something in the pipeline ahead and always having something I needed to release. Help me remember, yeah, this is for me. I'm learning and growing, but also I owe it to these people that are giving me their time freely and having a conversation with someone who would otherwise never have access to them. Yeah. And that really forced me to get good at building systems and coming up with a real plan at that point.
Yeah, it is its own business.
Yes. Oh, it absolutely is. And by the way, listener, today, if you're like, ooh, this sounds great, I want to do it, keep in mind, this is a business. And so if you're like, I'm already overwhelmed, already stressed out, like it might not be the right time yet.
Yes, true.
But you have to have that in your mind to make sure that if you're going to start, you got to stick with it.
It's a commitment and it deserves to have like its proper attention and structure and a plan.
Yes. Yep.
So that leads us to our next question. Many people ask, should I launch my own podcast? What do you think?
I always immediately say yes. But Lauren, I feel like that's kind of my job, right? So
you're Mr. Podcast.
I'd say yes if you have something that you actually like. Don't have a podcast for the sake of having a podcast. Have it because you do have a message that you want to get out into the world, and ultimately, it's about serving listeners. It's about changing somebody's perspective, their life in a positive way. And I even tell this to people that are comedians that have podcasts. Like, oh yeah, Alex, my podcast is in personal development. What about me? I'm like, man, I run a 7-figure software company. Like, I want to listen to a comedy podcast in the day. Like, you are making my life better too. You just don't realize it. Yes. And so, like, if you have that perspective that I'm showing up to help, showing up to serve, I've got a real plan and focus for this, I say absolutely. And if at the end of the day, you're just like, I know I have this message inside me, I don't know what to do with it, then again, yes. If you're already overwhelmed, you're not even sure what it would be about, then maybe again, not yet, maybe later when you feel like you have that.
Right. Yeah, I think as we were saying, like podcasting is becoming almost a prerequisite for doing business with someone. Like the more you're seeing that, and you also at the same time though have people who are like, oh, it's oversaturated. Who is going to listen to my voice? There's already so many other comedy or wellness or personal development podcasts. Yes, but no one else is you. So if you have a unique message and you have the time, and this is something you've wanted to do for a while, like, let's go. Let's take action. Alex and I are going to walk you through the steps on how to do so.
Yeah, if I can just tell a little story to that voice side of things, like that's already out there. First off, most podcasts are inactive. There's less than 400,000 any time that are active across all podcasts. Less than 400,000. It's not a lot if you really think about it. But to the point that you just brought up, Lauren, that I love the idea of your voice. I'm going to give the example. Somebody very close to me in my life, he happens to be one of my younger brothers, I have given him the same advice for 7 years. He keeps on getting in the same bad cycle on a certain topic in his life. And I give him the same advice over and over again. And it is gold advice. I'm like, if he would do this, his life would change. And not long ago, less than a year ago, I'm hanging out with him and he goes, man, I just talked to this guy yesterday. He told me to do X, Y, Z. And Lauren, I kid you not, it's exactly the same thing I've been telling the kid for 7 years. And he's like, dude, how smart is that? I did it. My life is forever changed. I'm like, I wanted to hit him.
Right.
But I was like, oh man, I'm so happy for you. I'm sure you've been there as well, right?
Yes, 100%. It's almost like, I mean, you either have to hear it from someone else or you have to hear it in like a slightly more tweaked way, or you just have to be finally ready to hear it.
That's so right. And that's exactly the point here. If someone's saying this podcast already exists, it doesn't, because it has never been spoken in your voice, which for some people, it's the voice that's finally going to cause them to say, oh, I get it now. And it might just be a very slight variation. So to the people who are saying it's too late, there's already somebody doing it. I disagree with that wholeheartedly, because again, that person who needs your voice is searching for it. They're waiting for it. And no one else is able to speak to them in your way.
Exactly. There is someone who needs your exact message. And right now, maybe they're listening to someone else, but what they really need is you. So it's time for you to start showing up.
I love it.
Alex, what was it that made you decide to build software solutions specifically for podcasters? Were you struggling to find guests for your show, or talk to us how you started PodMatch?
Sure. I'll give a very brief overview of PodMatch just for listeners to understand what we're talking about. PodMatch is a software that connects podcast guests and hosts for interviews. Very simply put, it works very similar to a dating app, but does not connect you for dates. It connects you for podcast interviews. Yeah, it connects you for podcast interviews instead. And it's just putting that guest and host together, removing the friction between, so that you can get behind the microphone faster and add more value together that serves listeners. And the idea for it actually was kind of through my journey of becoming an entrepreneur. Again, I kind of learned how to become an entrepreneur from the people who are on my podcast, and I knew I wanted to be in podcasting. And what I learned in a very simplified version of entrepreneurship was there's 4 steps. Step 1, find an area of passion, which for me had become podcasting. Step 2 is to get into the community where you're passionate. And so I started speaking at all the podcasting events. I started meeting other podcasters, networking with them, spending time with them. And then the third thing is to offer a simple solution to find a problem people have, a problem that they're struggling with, make it a simple problem, and then offer the fastest possible solution. And so I'll never forget, it was actually the beginning of the year 2020, before the world shut down at that point. I was speaking at a podcasting conference, and I was on stage, about 2,000 people there. And when I got off stage, I made a commitment that I was going to speak with every podcaster who would talk to me and ask them the one simple question, which is, what's something you're struggling with right now? Wow. And Lauren, they confirmed the same problem I was having. They were having trouble finding that ideal guest. Now, there's a lot of people that would like to be on a podcast, and I'll be real, Lauren, my 15-year-old nephew would love to be on your podcast. Should he be on your podcast? Absolutely not, right? And so there might be people who say, Lauren looks great. I would love to be on her podcast, right? Like there might be those people, but it's like putting those right people together faster. And so that's why I took back to the drawing board. When I came home from Orlando, Florida, I live up in Jacksonville, so it was not a long drive. I started whiteboarding it out. And so I just started going through it, and I was like, man, what's something that's connected people really well? And I literally thought, I think dating apps. Granted, I've been married too long to have ever used one, but I was like, I know that they help people. And so that's really where it came into. So with the solution we decided to provide, which is now PodMatch, was this idea of, can we leverage this existing technology to serve the podcasting industry as well? And ultimately, that's what led me to become an entrepreneur.
So incredible. I'm so grateful for PodMatch. It has helped me secure some amazing guests. And I actually was on a podcast earlier with someone who I also found on PodMatch. So
I love that. That's great.
Fully in my life. And so for our listeners, like, envision this, you create your profile, questions you would want to ask on your show or be asked, your podcast link, your bio, and then you get to message and search other podcasters who maybe speak or specialize in the same industry.
No, that's it. Thank you for explaining that so beautifully. I would have said it in a lot more words. So you helped me. Thank you.
So how can, for our listeners, once you have your profile set up, how can you find and book ideal guests for your show once you're on PodMatch?
Yeah. To me, the first thing that you have to keep in mind is that as the host, you don't owe anything to potential listeners. And I want to make sure that that's understood. Like, I'm not saying be rude to people, but the only person that you owe something to is the person who's trusting with their ears, your listeners.
Mhm.
right? Lauren, if I asked to be on your podcast and I was very rude to you about getting on, I wanted to talk about a topic that doesn't relate to anything, and you end up letting me on, and it was a terrible experience, and then you release that episode, you're breaking trust with the people who've chosen to listen to your podcast because it's not showing up the way that you authentically show up. Now it's out of
Mhm.
alignment because you felt like
Mhm.
maybe, oh, but this person wanted to be on. And the
Right.
reason I bring that up, myself included, I'm a bit of a people pleaser. Saying no
Mhm.
doesn't come very
Yes.
natural to me. And,
Likewise.
and there was a few times early on my podcasting journey before PodMatch that I had the wrong guest on. And a lot of my listeners reached out and they said, that was not good. Like that person showed
Mm.
up with a ill intent, a bad agenda. Like,
Mhm.
why did you post that? And I was like, well, they asked and I felt bad. And the reality is we can't do that because again,
Mhm.
we have the trust of our listeners, you and
Yeah.
I today, right? The people that are hearing this. And our job is to protect their ears from what they don't need to hear. And
Mhm.
so we have to have that perspective is like, okay, this is not about the potential guest. If you launch a podcast, you join PodMatch as a host, you will have a lot of people reach out to you, and some of which don't need to be on your show. And
Yeah.
what we did inside of PodMatch to make this easy, because again, I think the best person to design this was me. I say that humbly because being a people pleaser, I'm like, how do we have a pass button that really lets people down lightly? That's not offensive, right? And so
Right.
we worked very hard to make this pass button that sends out very kind verbiage saying thank you, but no thank you, right? And
Yes.
so I always tell people like, hey, if you build a show and you're going after guests, be ready to say no the majority of the
Mhm.
time. And
Mhm.
your job is to vet those people with your listeners in mind, which ones are
Yes.
going to serve them well.
Yes.
And Lauren, real quick, I think you've done a beautiful job with this. I've
Thank
been
you.
listening to a lot of episodes of your podcast, and again and again and again, repeatedly, I hear really great content with like-minded people that are here to serve. And so
Mhm.
you've done a very good job embodying what I'm talking about here.
Thank you. It's so kind. I appreciate that. When you start in the beginning, you're like, let's see what the listeners like. Like I want to provide some different kind of areas, individuals who I'm inspired by, individuals who have stories to tell and people to serve and like see what the listeners like. Because when you're just starting, yes, you have this overarching theme, but you don't know exactly like what areas, and you also don't know how you're going to vibe with the guest until you're on the show. And that's
It's
a
so true.
huge factor.
It is. I had one guy on my show that went against my better judgment. I felt like I don't know why. I heard him on another podcast. I'm like, I don't feel like I'm going to get along with this guy. And sure enough, I actually that was the first episode I ended up not posting because I was
Yeah.
like, it was so bad. And like,
Yeah.
he was such a, and I'm not trying to be mean, but he was a rude person. Like he took 3 phone
Mm.
calls during our interview.
Oh
And
my
he's
gosh.
like, hey, hold on, like mid thought. And he's like, mutes it. And he's like, I can tell he's not in a rush to get off the call. And I'm like, I get it if like an emergency comes up. I'm like, he's
Right.
clearly just like laughing, having a good time. Anyway, you gotta kind of like learn, but you don't really know what's
Yes.
going to happen until you get behind the microphone together.
You don't. Being present and being a good listener is so important in podcasting. And it takes skill. Like when I first started, it was scary just to like, I was like so rigid, like question, 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 and so structured. And now it's like you can flow, you can relax. It's a conversation.
Yeah, real quick to everyone listening today, I encourage you do what I did today, which I went back to some of Lauren's first episodes, some in the middle, and some to where we're at today. Do the same. And the reason I'm saying that, because I don't know about you, Lauren, I'd like my first episode I ever recorded to disappear. But I still hear from people who go back and listen, like, wow, you've come a long way. And at first that's like embarrassing to hear, but I'm like, no, I have. And I
Yeah.
love that the journey has a legacy, has a long tail, right?
Mm.
And so the reason I encourage you to do that, if you're hearing this today, go back. You can hear that Lauren has gotten very good at this, right? Like our
Aw.
conversation today doesn't feel scripted.
Yeah.
Day one, it probably did.
It
And I
did.
say that to give everyone the freedom of like, well, I don't sound like Alex or Lauren, so I can't podcast. We
Mm.
didn't sound like this when we got started. And so I
Yeah.
encourage you, be willing to do that. And if
Mhm.
somebody resonates with what you're sharing, you might still be asking great questions, even if you feel like you're reading them off a list. That's
Yeah.
okay. That's great. Let the evolution within you happen and you can grow and develop as you go.
It's so true. It's so easy to compare yourself to someone who's done it 3, 5, 7, 10 years. How will I sound like them? If you go back to their first episode, they started like you're going to sound when you start your first one.
Right. For me, like a robot reading it off, reading a
Yes,
script is what it sounded like.
exactly. So back to PodMatch and pitching yourself perhaps as a guest. Maybe you don't even have your own podcast, but you want to start doing some podcasting. What are some tips you have for pitching a podcast you want to be on?
Yeah, going back to the data side of things, every day there are a lot more people reaching out to be a guest on podcasts than the flip side of that. I say that to let people know that are hearing this and saying, "Ooh, I want to be a guest on podcast." You will have competition, and many of them might be more experienced than you. And I don't say that to be discouraging in any way at all. It just means you have to do a good job on the pitch. the first message, the email, whatever it is that you want to call it. We call it a pitch in the business. So that first point of contact that you're making with them has to be good. And I'll share what I do that works really well. But first off, I do want to say this, you need to be willing to reach out. We get out of life, we get out of business, what we put into it. I've met many people, even people that have quite the profile online. They've done a lot in business. They've done a lot in life. Sit back and wait for podcasters to come to them and then complain when no one's showing up. I'm like, well, that's because everyone else is doing the work. They're reaching out, right?
Yes.
So first off, you got to be willing to reach out. And what I'm about to share is like a very simple framework that I use that works really well for me. The secret sauce is keeping it short. Lauren and I got into podcasting because we didn't want to read everything. We want to talk, right? So as brief as you can. Am I right in saying that, Lauren? I mean, you've gotten the
you're
book
correct.
of,
We're ready to talk. Yeah.
Right. We've both gotten the pitches, I'm sure, that like, you're like, this is,
oh my gosh, like
paragraphs.
essays.
Like what?
Yeah.
Like, and we don't enjoy those. So keep it short. What I like to do is this framework. Step one is to lead with value. And I'll just kind of give a natural example here. If I was going to pitch to be on Lauren's show, the way I'd start off is with what I already did. I would listen to her show first. Yes, it takes a little bit more time, but I would literally say, Lauren, I loved hearing the way that you've evolved as a podcaster. I listened to some of your first episodes, some from the middle, and some of your most current. I can just tell that you've improved so much. And I really enjoyed the show. I attached a 5-star review that I left on Apple Podcast for you. At the very least, I now have Lauren's interest. Like, Lauren's not gonna be like, whatever, delete that email, right? Like, or delete that message on PodMatch. Like, at the very least, you're probably saying, okay, go on. Like, where's this going, right? So step one, lead with value. And again, keeping it really short. What I said was a bit wordy, so keep it a little bit shorter. The second thing is to make a meaningful request. And this is where a lot of people get it wrong. Sometimes they get really long pitches where there's no clear ask. Like, sometimes I'll actually go through and read it, and at the end of it, I'm like, I don't know what they want. Congratulations or thank you. Like, I'm not really sure what to
Are you
say.
okay?
Like, everything all right? Do you need help? Blink twice. I don't know. And so a meaningful request doesn't just mean I want to be a guest on your podcast, although that's better than what most people do. But meaningful request means actually filling in a gap. So again, if I just went through and looked at Lauren's backlog, right? And I looked at the different episodes that she's had, I can see, okay, is my topic being covered recently or ever? And so a meaningful request would be like, hey, Lauren, I think that the Fieldswell Podcast listeners would really enjoy hearing about being a podcast host and guest. I noticed you haven't covered that on your show, at least in the last bit of time that I could see. I'd love the opportunity to be a guest to talk about that. What that does for a host, the host says, oh, wait, are you really? We haven't covered that? Because that'd be a great topic. Let me go back and look. And they'll go look themselves and be like, oh, man, we have a gap, right?
I need this.
Right. I need this. That's the idea, right? And so doing those two things, I think, is huge. And the third point that a lot of people get wrong is the credibility. We get the idea of credibility wrong. So step 3 is to offer some form of credibility. But a lot of us want to immediately throw a resume in. I've been in business for this long. I've written this book. I've accomplished this. I've accomplished that. That's great. I actually like to link out to that stuff. I link out to my PodMatch profile. So no matter where I'm reaching out to people, I link to my PodMatch guest profile that has all those details on it. The credibility that somebody wants is, who do you know that they also know and admire? You can go through social media, see who you both follow, look at pictures, see if there's anyone that you happens to resemble, right? Or was there an event that you were both at, right? Like Lauren and I were both at the same event in DC. I was a speaker there. I can say, hey, by the way, I spoke at that conference in DC that we were both at. That right there is probably credibility enough. Like, oh, wait, I just attended that event. So even if we don't have somebody in common, that goes a really long way. And then you can just say, and if you want to see more about me, here's a link to that. Again, because you want to keep it short. And the final thing I'll mention here is to offer to share the episode. So you can just say, hey, if you do pick me as a guest, and no pressure either way, but I'd love to share the episode with my audience because I think they'd get a lot of value from it. Speak from integrity. Don't BS your way through any of this, right? Tell the truth. Be serious. Be sincere. Yeah. But if you're willing to share it, say that. Because most guests are not willing to share it at all, which blows my mind. I don't understand that. But I'm telling you, if you go through these 4 steps, you're going to get picked up on shows.
Very true. 100% on that. Well done.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So in this day and age, this whole having a personal brand thing is really standing out. We're able to market ourselves across various platforms. We're realizing the importance of consistency and having a personal brand. How can we use a podcast to grow our brand by either guesting on podcasts or having our own podcast? How do you see that playing in?
Yeah, on both sides of the microphone, the biggest thing I see it do is actually the internal change for you. It helps you develop. It helps you figure out who you are, where you want to be, where you're going, right? Which to me, that's one of the biggest thing. biggest things you'll kind of get from it is just that self-discovery. For me, like being a guest, I'll speak to that side first. When hosts look at me like I'm crazy after I said something, or like, can you say that differently? Or can you go a little further into that? I realize something I'm sharing is not resonating or making sense to their people. And from a personal branding standpoint, eventually you kind of get those reps in and you finally figure out how to really verbalize what you're trying to say and what you want people to understand. A great real-time example of this is, have you ever been to like a big networking event? I've been to some that have like thousands of people. And the first person you talk to, it takes you like 10 minutes to introduce yourself. The next person, 9, then 8, then 7. And by the last day, you're like, hi, my name is Alex. I run a company called PodMatch that connects podcast guests and hosts for interviews. What do you do? And it's like, wait a minute, at its simplest form, people understand that, right? And so that's what you're doing by going to podcast, not to shorten it that much. That's an extreme example, but you're figuring out how people respond to what you share. And so on both sides of the microphone, it gives you this sense of clarity that I don't know is that you can get in any other way.
Wow.
It allows you to be able to discover that. And on top of that, people do business or follow or want to be around people that they know, like, and trust. And I don't know about you, but like social media posts alone, it has its place, doesn't really tell me that I can trust this person. But I'll tell you what, like I could tell that Lauren Fields is somebody I want in my corner after listening to just a handful of episodes, because I feel like I know Lauren now. Like if we hung out in person, I've got like 20 talking points, and we feel the same way about a lot of topics, right? Like I know these things now. And so it develops that know, like, and trust. And if you're the host or the guest, you get that opportunity on both sides of the microphone. One more thing on the host side, and it's just that you get the opportunity to have this platform. It gives you this level of expertise. It shows that you're like an authority on whatever topic it is that your podcast is covering. That really makes you stand out in a room as well. It's a very beautiful business card.
It really is, Alex. And I really like how you put it that way. It's almost like podcasting is a personal development tool to refine and clarify your message, your voice, what you're about. I think that's brilliant. And while I have thought about it in that way, in a sense, like it really hit home for me right now. So thank you for saying that.
Oh, I love that. That's great.
Yeah. So I want to walk people through the steps of starting a podcast. Maybe some tips on, we know hosting. You find your hosting site. I record on Riverside, and then I used to host on Libsyn. Now I'm on Simplecast. But maybe some steps and a little bit deeper so individuals understand the steps for starting.
Sure. I spoke at a podcasting conference, or sorry, it wasn't. It was actually a women's conference. And I was like the token guy there, and they wanted me to talk about podcasting. But right before, the lady who ran it, she's like, hey, I just realized half the room didn't have a podcast. Can you work into your 45-minute talk how to start a podcast as well? I was like, can I? And then I thought about it for a minute, I wrote it down. I'm like, oh, actually, it's really easy. Yes, I can.
It is. Yeah.
Right? And so what you're talking about hosting, a lot of people that want to get into podcasting, like, how am I going to get on it? Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, like all these different places.
Right.
Lauren used the word hosting, and that's what it's a hosting provider. You upload it to one place, and it does what's called syndication, which means it pushes it everywhere on your behalf. So there's no like manual, I have to now go all these different places. You upload it to one place. And to do that, all you need is two things. Or I guess a few things, but like your cover art, so an image, a title of your podcast, a description for your podcast, and a single episode. And then you're good to go. You technically have a podcast. And so we both use riverside.fm to do our recordings. I do my solo recordings in here as well. Do you do your solo recordings in here too?
I do. Cool. I want to work better on the like filming aspect of that, because if I use my computer, it's kind of a wide angle. So harder when I want to like get vertical shots of it. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does. Yeah.
You probably have tips for me, but we can talk after on that.
Yeah, we can talk after. Yeah. I got some ideas. But yeah, so we're using Riverside to record. And past that, you don't really need much else. Like even Riverside will do your editing as well. Like if you want to do some basic editing and stuff, if you want some transcripts, it's got all that there. Those are really the tools that you need. I always suggest PodMatch with it if you're going to do have guests on your show, because then those three tools combined are really all you need to get started in podcasting. At that conference, that's what I shared. And I was like, that took me 3 minutes.
In addition to a microphone and some like proper lighting, I love my Zoom P4. Zoom PodTrack P4 is what I use, and I got on Amazon, and it's been amazing. You probably have a little bit more of a high-tech mic, maybe if you want to share. Yeah,
that's a good point, Lauren. I didn't think about that. So I use a Logitech 4K camera, and I use a Shure MV7 is my microphone. And I went with these specifically because they're both USB. I'm in podcasting, and I run a software company, but I'm not the most like tech savvy guy when it comes to the hardware.
Yeah.
Both of them plug straight into my MacBook Pro. Literally, they plug in with USB, and that's what I wanted. Like, I want it to be really simple. I've got some good lighting around here as well. If anyone's watching this, this is my home studio build out. And the important thing about a microphone that I want to mention here, because this will make or break your podcasting experience on either side of the microphone. You want what's called a dynamic microphone, not condenser. You want to be a dynamic microphone. The reason is a condenser microphone will pick up noise from your neighbors 10 houses down from you. A dynamic microphone, if I take 4 steps away from this microphone, you can't hear me at all, but I sound really crisp and clean right here. That's what you want, unless you have a true studio build out. And if you don't, like me, I'm in my home. This works so much better for me because people can be in the next room having a conversation and you won't be able to know that. So dynamic microphones, what you'd be looking for. And there's a lot of really great entry level microphones for $50 to $70. And there's great 4K webcams for around the same price that'll make you look a step above almost anybody else in the space, because so few people do that. Most just start with their built-ins.
Yep, I'm on the built-in camera and I'm about to upgrade after this episode.
It still looks, here's the thing, I didn't actually know that. That's how good the tech is getting. Like, it looks great. You can get away with that for a little bit. Make the investment as soon as you know it's something you want to do. Or if you're like me, invest in it up front to, again, have that accountability, that buy-in to make sure that you're willing to do it.
We're locked in. So now that we've given our listeners a crash course on podcasting, thank you. That has been amazing. I'd like to wrap up with a couple of personal questions.
Yeah, love it.
So I've listened to a few episodes you've been on, and I know you've mentioned faith as an important part of your life. I'd love for you to tell us how your faith has shaped your leadership style and approach to business.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity and platform to be able to talk about this. So I happen to believe in Jesus from the Bible. I don't consider myself a religious person. I just am a person of faith and choose that's my foundation. So I look to biblical principles around the person of Jesus to be how I decide I want to treat people, which is to love people and to serve them well. And so everything I do is around that idea. So even with PodMatch, a great example of this is, and maybe this is a little too practical, but we don't use the word user on PodMatch. We're a software company that doesn't use the term user. And that's because I don't want to label people as a number or just a quote unquote user of something. They're valued members of our community that we love and serve. And because of that, we always have that mentality, and that flows into everything we do. And I can say this is a human that I want to help take care of, because at my core, that's my conviction, that's my faith. It really shapes a lot of the leadership style that we formed. And something else I believe in is just doing for one what you wish you could do for all.
Yeah.
So anytime I get the opportunity to serve one person, I take it. I'm not saying, oh, I'm a big software founder, I don't have time for you anymore, right? No, it's like, okay, if this is my person today that I can serve and love really well and be very specific with them, I wish I could do that for everybody, but if this is my one person a day, I'm going to do it. And so that's really like shaped the company. And it's one of the biggest compliments that we get. People are like, wow, you all really care.
You
right?
care.
Like, I've never worked with a software company that cares. And so to me, that's huge. And I don't do it for that reason. I do it because, again, like my belief, but this has become the byproduct of it, is that you actually build a software and a community that people love to be part of because they feel valued in it.
I was going to say, and it is aligned with your values. Things are becoming so transactional in this day and age. People are treated like objects, and so to feel like you're part of a bigger community goes a really long way.
Yeah. Oh, it really does. And listen, if you want to stand out like in anything you're doing, just treat people well. And believe it or not, that makes you different than the norm, which is really sad. But to me, I think it's easier to be nice to people than be mean to them. It seems to take less energy, at least. So
I'm with you.
Yeah, if you do that, it seems to pay off a lot more.
Treat others as you would want to be treated.
Yes. Well said.
So you're a CEO, podcast host, and a leader in the podcasting world. How do you juggle it all without burning out? Are there any routines or habits that keep you grounded that you'd like to share with us today?
Yes. My routines are they're cornerstone to the success that I've had. First and foremost, I kind of look at my routines as morning, daily, and evening. So I have 3 different sets of things that I do, kind of rituals, habits along the way. The big thing is having a time that I wake up every day and I go to bed. And I'll tell you what, when I first started as an entrepreneur, I was like, oh man, no more alarm clock, right? Like I'm not required to be anywhere at any time.
Yeah.
That was really not smart of me from day one to do that. And when I started realizing this company's not going to work unless I'm actually willing to take it very seriously. So I wake up, and it's not, for some people, this doesn't sound super early, but I wake up at 6 a.m. That's when my alarm goes off, and I go to bed at 10. Alex's natural desire is to wake up at 9 and go to bed at like 3 in the morning. Like that's just who I am naturally. But I did find that my best work is done at those times. And so I have alarm clocks to go to bed, which sounds wild to some people, but I'm like, I have to. Like I owe it to myself to be the best version of myself. And so I'm going to bed on time. I'm waking up on time. I'm very careful with what I eat, what I drink, my fitness routine, just keeping everything really in a line. I have a bunch of different habits and routines and rituals around those things to make sure that I'm really daily living at the highest level, like really just like totally honed in to who I am and where I want to go. And that to me is so important. I'm not going to get into all the specifics. There's so many like little things. If there's any that you want to know, of course I can go there, but just what needs to be known is the fact that yes, I am grounded in routines and habits and have accountability around those things.
Yeah, I think routines are so important. And we go back to the major 3 things, like foundational level that many like overlook. We make it so complicated. Sleep. I have my Aura ring on here, which tracks my sleep. It tells me how much REM sleep, deep sleep. It gives me a sleep score every day. I know how long it took me to fall asleep. So this has been amazing for anyone looking to like biohack their sleep or like learn more about their sleep. The sleep, the movement, right? Moving your body, and then just eating nutritious meals. Like if you can do those 3 things, if you can get quality night sleep, move your body, and eat well,
it's a complete game changer.
It really is.
Listen, I eat 5 times a day and I drink my body weight in ounces every day. Like I got this thing dialed in to knowing that that's where I perform optimally. And it's different for each of us. I probably think I'm not like a nutritionist or anything like that, but
so I went to the Institute of Integrative Nutrition. It's a health and wellness program in I think it was founded in New York. I did it online, but it says it's bio-individual. You have to find what works for you.
And listen, for me, this is what works. And it's made a huge difference. People regularly ask me like, people are like, you must work 24/7. How do you get it all done in a day? I think I work, I have it written down to know the exact time. It's just over 8 hours a day. And I have like a hard end time. And again, like accountability is huge, but sometimes having systems is big too. One of that is this computer that I'm on right now. And exactly 20 minutes from now, it will literally kick me off of it. And I do not have the password to turn it back on. My wife has that password. My phone does the same thing. Because if I'm left to my own devices, I'll be like, well, Lauren and I wanted to talk more, or now I wanted to check my email one more time. No, like I'm done. I said that's my end time. And I need to respect that. So the next 4 hours can be focused on something different so I can get to bed at 10 o'clock and have really good sleep tonight. This sounds extreme, but I'm telling you, like your future, you will thank you if you do things like this.
Yes, the structure and the boundaries are so important.
Yeah.
Alex, it has been such a pleasure. Is there anything you'd like to leave our audience with today?
Yeah, I think the last thing I'd love to share with everybody is just to remember that like there is a future version of yourself that if they could speak into you today, they'd probably tell you to do at least a few things differently than you're doing now so that you could end up in a better place than they are or get there faster, right? And I think that something that many of us don't do is spend enough time self-reflecting and thinking about this, thinking about yourself in the future, talking to that individual, having them speak to you. Some of it sounds a bit woo, but the reality is if you can sit down and do this and really think about it, you know the advice that future you would give you. Sometimes we're just not ready to hear it. But the sooner we can put ourselves in those shoes saying, I'm ready for this. I'm ready for grown-up version of Alex to tell me how to improve my life. I'm telling you, you can get better and do a lot more faster. And I've never seen that not make someone's life better for them, more enjoyable, more impactful for others around them. So I encourage you, take time, sit down, reflect, and think about yourself in the future and have that person really pour into you as well. And you can start seeing some big things happen in your life.
Who do I want to be and how can I start to act like that person today?
Yes.
Amazing. Alex, where can our listeners find you?
Everything I do is at podmatch.com/free. If you're a podcast host, guest, or aspiring guest or host, whatever it might be, if you go to podmatch.com/free, I give you 5 quick things that will help you out, at least getting you started or on the right track or on a better track even. So again, podmatch.com/free. But Lauren, really, I'm telling everyone who's listening to this, hang out with Lauren. She's taking you all places. Absolutely love what you're doing. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much for coming on today, Alex.
Yep. Thanks again.